It was supposed to be a simple drive, 9 hours on snow-covered roads to our new home. My dad and I, pushing through the storm, watched as the snow quickly thickened, swallowing the world outside. The road ahead disappeared under a blanket of white, and just when we thought we couldn't go any further, headlights appeared out of the blizzard. A truck pulled up beside us and a man stepped out, his calm voice cutting through the wind as he offered help. But as we followed him into the storm, something didn't feel right. And when we left, we looked back. He was gone, but the truck was still there. The strangest part? We never saw him leave. Keep watching till the end because you won't believe what happened next. But before we get lost in the shadows, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss out our chilling upcoming episodes. If you're enjoying our eerie stories, leave a like, drop a comment, and share the terror with others. And for even more eerie content, follow us on social media. Keep the fear alive. Thanks for joining me on this spooky journey. Now, let's dive into the nightmare. In the winter of 2014, my family faced a major relocation that required a grueling 9-hour drive to our new home. I had recently earned my driver's license and was tasked with driving our car to the new house, accompanied by my dad. My mum and sisters decided to fly, leaving us to navigate the icy, snow-covered roads. The plan was straightforward. We would drive through the night, aiming to arrive around midnight. However, the winter landscape, initially picturesque, quickly turned hostile. A blizzard began to brew, and soon the snow was falling so heavily that visibility dropped to near zero. I expressed my concerns about the worsening conditions, but my dad insisted we could handle it, downplaying the severity of the storm. By early evening, the blizzard had intensified. Snow pounded relentlessly against the windshield, and the road ahead was barely discernible. My heart raced as the car struggled to maintain traction on the slick, icy road. Despite my growing unease, my dad remained steadfast, never suggesting we stop or seek shelter. Around 8 p.m., our situation took a turn for the worse. The storm raged on and the driving conditions deteriorated rapidly. Suddenly we hit a patch of ice and the car began to skid uncontrollably. I fought to regain control, but the car spun violently, veering off the road and crashing into a snowbank. The impact jolted us and the car came to a halt, buried in the snow. We were stranded with no other vehicles in sight and the storm growing fiercer by the minute. My dad tried to use his phone to call for help, but the signal was weak and unreliable in the storm. As we sat in the freezing car, the wind howling outside, a sense of isolation and dread settled over us. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, we saw headlights piercing through the blizzard. A vehicle approached, moving slowly through the snow. Relief washed over me as I hoped for assistance. However, when the vehicle finally came to a stop beside us, I was met with a chilling sight. The driver, a man in his mid-50s, stepped out of his truck, his face obscured by a thick beard and a worn hat. His demeanor was unnervingly calm as he approached our car. "Need a hand?" he called out, his voice barely audible over the wind. My dad, despite his apprehension, gratefully accepted the offer, explaining our situation and asking if he could help us get back on the road or call for a tow truck. The man's expression shifted subtly, and he began asking odd questions about our destination and our travel plans. My dad, sensing something off about the situation, tried to keep the conversation focused on getting assistance. The man's responses were vague and evasive, and his insistence on helping us seemed increasingly insincere. A shiver of fear ran down my spine when the man mentioned that he knew a shortcut through the woods that could get us to safety. The idea of following a stranger into the stormy wilderness was terrifying, but with no other options, we reluctantly agreed. The man offered to lead us, guiding us through the blizzard with his truck's headlights cutting through the darkness. As we followed his truck, the storm grew more intense. The snow piled up and the wind howled around us, creating an eerie, suffocating atmosphere. After what felt like hours, we finally reached a small, dimly lit cabin hidden deep in the woods. The man gestured for us to follow him inside, claiming it was a safe place where we could wait out the storm. My dad hesitated, but with no better options, we followed him into the cabin. The interior was surprisingly warm but sparsely furnished. The man offered us hot drinks and insisted we stay until the storm passed. As we sat in the dimly lit room, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The man's behavior was increasingly unsettling, and I noticed that he was watching us closely, his eyes never leaving us. My dad, sensing our discomfort, excused himself to check the car and see if there was any chance of getting it unstuck. The man offered to accompany him, and they stepped outside into the blizzard. I was left alone in the cabin, my anxiety mounting with each passing minute. Minutes turned into an eternity as I waited in the cabin, the blizzard raging outside. Finally, my dad returned, his face pale and filled with concern. He explained that the man had been acting strangely and that he had seen what looked like other vehicles or tracks in the snow, leading him to suspect that this place might not be as safe as it seemed. We decided to leave the cabin despite the storm's fury. We quickly gathered our things and made our way back to the car. As we drove away, the man watched us from the cabin, his face illuminated by the faint light of the storm. We didn't stop until we found a more secure shelter, where we could wait out the blizzard in safety. In the end, we never discovered the true intentions of the strange man or the legitimacy of his offer. The unsettling encounter left us shaken and wary. The memory of that night in the blizzard, the feeling of being lured into a potentially dangerous situation, stayed with us for years. It was the kind of winter I had always dreamed of. A pristine blanket of snow covering the landscape, the cold air crisp and refreshing. After weeks of working in the city, I decided to drive out into the countryside for a weekend alone. I'd rented a small cottage near a tiny town, a place where I could disconnect and unwind. The weather forecast had predicted some snow, but nothing too extreme, so I didn't think twice about the trip. I was wrong. The drive started out fine. The roads were clear, the sky cloudy but not menacing, and I was in good spirits. I passed small villages, empty fields, and scattered barns as I ventured deeper into the heart of the countryside. But as I crossed into a more remote part of the journey, the snow started to fall, at first lightly and then more rapidly. The winds picked up, and before I knew it, I could barely see more than a few feet ahead of me. The landscape around me blurred into a wall of white, and I had no choice but to slow down. As the storm worsened, I pulled over onto the side of the road. I had no cell service, and the GPS was useless in the snowstorm. It seemed like there was no other car on the road, no houses, nothing but the endless white of the fields and trees. I wasn't sure how long I would have to wait for the storm to die down, but I figured a few hours at worst. I tried to relax and read a book, but my mind kept drifting back to the road and the storm outside. The howling winds were making the car shake slightly, and I could hear the occasional thud of snow piling up against the windshield. The eerie silence outside only made everything feel more oppressive. Then, just as I was about to drift off, I saw it, headlights in the distance. They were faint at first, just tiny specks of light cutting through the blizzard, but they grew brighter as they approached. I felt a flicker of relief. Finally, someone else was out here, maybe even a plow or another driver who could help me out. The car seemed to be moving slowly but steadily toward me, and I began to prepare myself to wave them down. But as the car got closer, something strange caught my eye. It wasn't making any sound. No engine noise, no tires crunching against the snow, just a set of headlights moving toward me, almost as if it was gliding across the snow. A chill ran down my spine. I couldn't look away. The car was getting closer, yet it made no noise. It was as though the very storm had swallowed up any sound, or that the car itself wasn't entirely real. The headlights shone brighter, and the dark, dense snowstorm around us made everything feel surreal. The car stopped just beside mine, and I stared at it through my frosted-up window. I half expected the driver to roll down their window and speak, to ask if I was okay or if I needed help. But the window remained closed, and the car sat completely still. I could see no sign of life inside the vehicle. No movement, no breath fogging up the window, nothing. I felt a sense of unease I couldn't explain. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. I sat there for a long moment, unsure of what to do. Then, after what felt like an eternity, I finally gathered the courage to step out of my car and approach the other vehicle. My feet crunched in the snow as I walked toward the mysterious car. I had to squint through the heavy snow, and the further I got, the more the car seemed wrong. The headlights weren't just bright, they were unnaturally bright, like a light source that shouldn't exist in the middle of a snowstorm. When I reached the car, I peeked inside, expecting to find a driver asleep or waiting for the storm to pass, but there was nothing. The interior was completely empty, not even a single bag or piece of luggage in sight. Just an empty, untouched car sitting in the snow. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. There was something off about it. The snow around the car was undisturbed, as though it had just materialized there out of nowhere, and I couldn't explain how it had gotten so close to me without a sound. No tracks. Nothing. Suddenly I heard a voice. It was a whisper, barely audible over the wind, but unmistakable. "Get in the car!" I spun around, my heart racing. The voice seemed to come from behind me, carried by the storm. My mind screamed at me to run, to get back in my car and drive away, but I was rooted to the spot. I looked around. No one. Just the swirling snow and the empty fields. "Get in the car!" the voice repeated, this time louder, more insistent. I turned back toward the empty car. The headlights were still glaring, but now they seemed to grow even brighter, almost blinding. I didn't know what to do. Every instinct told me to run, to get back in my car and leave, but something held me there, frozen. I turned and sprinted back to my car, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands were shaking as I locked the doors, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look out the window. I didn't want to see anything. I didn't drive off immediately. I just sat there, my hands gripped around the wheel, waiting for something to happen. The storm raged on, but the other car, was gone. There was no sign of it, no movement in the snow. It had just disappeared into the whiteness. I stayed in that spot for hours, too terrified to move. The storm continued, and the landscape around me was now a blur of white, but I didn't dare leave. Eventually the storm calmed down, and I drove off as fast as I could, heading for the nearest town. The rest of the drive was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something far worse. When I finally reached the town, I didn't tell anyone what had happened. They would have thought I was crazy. But I know what I saw. I don't know what it was, or if it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But I've never driven alone through a snowstorm since. And every winter, when the snow falls, I can still hear the voice. "Get in the car." It started with a light dusting, the kind of snow that fell softly and steadily, making everything look like a winter wonderland. I was alone at the cabin, a little rustic getaway, in the middle of nowhere, and I had no plans to leave. A weekend retreat, Just me, a few books, and the sound of the wind howling outside. Perfect. But then the storm hit. It came in waves, unexpected and relentless. By the time the first day was over, the snow had piled up high outside the windows, and the winds were howling louder than I had ever heard. It wasn't the usual blizzard you hear about on the news. This one felt different. There was an odd, unsettling quality to the wind, almost like it was alive. I couldn't leave the cabin. I didn't want to risk driving out in that kind of weather. Not alone, not this deep in the mountains. I called my friend for reassurance. My phone had full bars, but my friend's voice was crackling, cutting in and out, like the storm was messing with the signal. The line went dead shortly after, and that's when I started feeling the first stirrings of panic. The wind roared louder, shaking the windows. The power flickered, and I lit a few candles. The cabin was old, built in the 70s, so the lights often went out, but this was different. The storm was too severe. It felt like the world outside had gone completely mad. By the second day, I couldn't see anything through the snow, no sky, no horizon, just a wall of white. The roads were impassable, and I had no choice but to stay put. The fire in the fireplace was my only source of heat, and I tended to it obsessively. I could hear strange sounds outside, scraping, thuds against the cabin walls like something was trying to get in. Maybe it was just the storm, but it sounded so deliberate. The noise echoed in the silence between gusts of wind, sending a chill down my spine. That evening I heard it, a faint knock at the door. It could have been the wind, or it could have been something else, but the knock sounded too human. 3 taps, one after another. I froze, listening intently. I hadn't seen anyone in days, and the nearest neighbor was miles away. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly approached the door. My breath hitched as I peered through the peephole. Nothing. Just a blanket of snow and the howling wind. I opened the door cautiously, stepping onto the snow-covered porch. There was no one in sight, but I noticed something strange, a pair of footprints in the snow, leading away from the cabin and into the woods. I wasn't alone. Someone had been out there. I slammed the door shut and bolted it. My mind raced. Who would be out here in this storm, and why? I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was probably someone who had gotten lost. But deep down I knew something wasn't right. It was too cold, too isolated. And the storm, it wasn't stopping. As the hours wore on, the sounds outside became more persistent. Scraping, knocking, low moans that felt like they were coming from just beneath the ground. I tried to tell myself it was just the storm, but my gut told me otherwise. Something was wrong. Something was out there. At dawn, when the storm finally seemed to weaken, I decided to venture outside and inspect the tracks, but when I opened the door, the snow had completely erased the footprints. Not a trace. It was as if no one had been out there at all. I stood there in the doorway, my breath visible in the cold morning air, and something felt off. That's when I saw it. A figure, pale, gaunt, and standing motionless just beyond the tree line. It was watching me. I called out, but the figure didn't move. It was like it was frozen in place, staring at me with a hollow, vacant gaze. My heart hammered in my chest. I backed away from the door slowly, my eyes never leaving it. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't a person, that it was something else, something that had no business being out here in the storm. The power went out again. The wind howled louder than before. I didn't go outside again. The storm raged on for days and I barely slept. I spent hours staring out the window, half expecting to see that figure again. The knocking returned every night. Always 3 taps, followed by silence. But I never opened the door. On the 5th day, I heard the sound of a vehicle, a truck's engine, a familiar sound that filled me with a false sense of relief. I ran outside to wave them down, to ask for help. But when I reached the driveway, there was no one there, only the tracks. They led to my door and then abruptly disappeared. I never went back to that cabin. I left as soon as the storm let up, the tracks from the figure still haunting me in the back of my mind. Every now and then I think I hear those 3 knocks on my door. And when I do, I remember the figure in the snow. Maybe it was the storm, maybe it was something else. But I'll never be able to shake the feeling that something was waiting for me out there, in that endless blizzard. And whatever it was, it's still out there. Have you ever faced something truly terrifying? Eerie Shadows wants to hear your story. Share your chilling experiences with us on Reddit, and together we'll uncover the eerie mysteries lurking in the shadows. If you'd like to support the channel and help us create even more terrifying content, consider checking out our Patreon or Ko-fi. Your support helps us keep the horror alive. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more bone-chilling tales like this one. Stay tuned for the next eerie episode